Reddit, if you don't know, is a $9.75 billion company. It is the third most visible company in the Google search results. It is ranked number 3 in terms of market share in everything that shows up when you Google something. And it has a pretty cool story about how it was founded. One of the most influential sites on the internet, a forum where lots of memes start on, a forum that lots of people are using for black hat marketing nowadays, a forum that lots of people derive their entertainment from and their lives from. A super influential tech phenomenon that started by faking critical mass, and that's what today's episode is about. I was asked this just a few hours ago. This was left as a comment on YouTube by Viva Las Vegas Nirvana, who says, "Sorry if you've spoken on this before, but would love to hear more about how Reddit faked critical mass." And I said, it's a good story. I'll cover it on today's podcast. And that's what you are getting on today's episode of the show. This is episode 422 of my daily digital marketing podcast, The Edward Show. Let's get into it. One of my favorite newsletters, it's the first 1,000 newsletter. It used to be about how companies got their first 1,000 customers and users. Now it is about conversion rate optimization. But back when it was about how companies got their first 1,000 customers and users, the author, Ali Abulata, wrote an issue on Reddit. And that's what I'm reading on today's episode of the show. The text for this will be linked in the description, and I would totally recommend the first 1,000 newsletter. It is a great newsletter about conversion rate optimization, and in its archives, it has lots of interesting stories about how companies got their first 1,000 customers and users. Here we go. Reddit, establishing trust through fake users, launching before you are ready, and everything you didn't know about how Reddit got their very first customers. The founding story. In 2003, University of Virginia gaming roomies Alexis Ohanian and Steve Huffman were starstruck with the entrepreneurial dream. Their make the world a better place idea at the time was a food ordering app named which was short 3 M's for My Mobile Menu. Alexis and Steve spent a year doing quote-unquote market research, creating databases of restaurants in Virginia, traveling to entrepreneurship events all over the world, registering a company, opening a bank account, basically everything they could do except actually launching the thing. During their senior year, Steve's girlfriend told him that Paul Graham was coming to Boston to give a talk about startups during their spring break. Steve knew Paul Graham through his book on Lisp, but Alexis had no clue who Paul Graham was. Steve decided it would be worth their time to travel all the way to Boston to get his book signed and maybe learn a thing or two about how to get off the ground. They packed up, traveled all the way to Boston, and after Paul was done with his talk, they approached Paul Graham with a Hail Mary. They went up to Paul Graham and they asked him, "Can we buy you a drink in exchange for you listening to us talk about our startup?" And Paul Graham said, "You came all the way up to Boston from Virginia?" Alexis Ohanian said yes, and Paul Graham said, "Sure, I'll take that drink." And that drink was a coffee, and this coffee chat would change the lives of Alexis and Steve and make them millionaires in their early 20s. They spent the time pitching and how they were going to make waiting in line a thing of the past. Paul Graham got excited. 2 hours into their conversation, Paul invited them to interview for the new startup incubator he was creating called Y Combinator. It was the first ever batch of Y Combinator. The actual pitch went well, but it did not gain enough traction with the investors to secure them a spot in their first ever Y Combinator batch. They were rejected from Y Combinator despite having a personal audience with Paul Graham, the founder of the thing. And then out of nowhere, a day after their rejection and on their way back to Virginia, Paul called up the young founders to reverse his decision. Alexis Ohanian recounts, "I got a call from Paul. He says, 'I'm sorry we made a mistake. We don't like your idea, but we like you guys.' We got off the train and I was able to sweet talk the Amtrak lady into not charging us because we were going to turn around. In our conversation, Paul said, 'You guys need to build the front page of the internet.' That was all Paul, and that became Reddit." If you don't know the alien, the Reddit mascot, the alien called Snoo, that's the Reddit mascot. And Alexis drew this Reddit mascot. It's super famous now. And Alexis drew this during his senior year in college. Even before the company's idea, he drew Snoo. He used Illustrator and the touchpad on his laptop to draw Snoo, the Reddit mascot. So funny. I didn't know that. After spending a year researching their food delivery concept, Y Combinator and Paul Graham gave the Reddit team about 2 weeks to launch the homepage of the internet. So they spent a year preparing this different idea without even launching it. And then Paul Graham says, nope, you're launching something else and you're doing it in 2 weeks. And it's going to be the homepage of the internet. To take a step back, at the time, this was not entirely a green field. The competition was steep. Digg, which had a similar ambition, announced a large Series A of 2.8 million. Yep, that was considered large back then. That's hilarious. 2.8 million for their Series A, and it was considered large back then. And they announced this just as Steve and Alexis were getting started on Reddit. To add salt to the injury, Digg was founded by a minor tech celebrity, Kevin Rose. The deadline and pressure from Y Combinator stemmed from this competitive pressure and perhaps arguably the fact that they wanted to have some demonstrable wins for their first ever batch of the accelerator of Y Combinator. At the end of the 2 weeks, Paul sent the co-founders a scathing email saying, you guys hadn't launched yet because you were incompetent, in which case you are hosed, or you're just worried about being perfect, in which case you are still hosed, because you would still need to launch it anyway and need to deal with the fact that it is not perfect. Steve from Reddit took the email personally and replied saying he had managed to get the fundamentals to work, and just a few weeks after, Paul Graham forced their hand to launch when he referenced Reddit in his famous What I Did This Summer essay, where he unleashed Y Combinator into the world. Just like that, Reddit was launched without the founders' knowledge or blessing. Traffic was spiking, but Steve, as you can imagine, was not too happy about how it all went down. I didn't know Paul Graham was going to do that, Steve said. The thing wasn't working. This one guy wrote a blog post about how terrible Reddit was. It was a frustrating day. But with that unplanned launch, just in a day, Reddit got over their first 1,000 user mark. So Paul Graham sends out this essay, announces Y Combinator, and references Reddit. And that immediately gets them over their first 1,000 users, even though Reddit is not working, or not working properly. Now we do a little bit of a side note, a little deep dive about launching before you're ready. In the Silicon Valley Gospel, Reid Hoffman pinned, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. But taking every one-size-fits-all startup advice to heart can be dangerous. Look no further than Reddit. Reddit launching a semi-baked product meant that the founders would spend the following months in disarray. They got hammered by the tech bloggers circle, drawing unfavorable comparisons to Digg. They had no fundamental mechanics to retain or engage that first cohort of users, all of which translated into Reddit losing every customer they gained from launch. They went from 0 users to 1,000 plus back to 0 in 48 hours. Launching too early might work well when you are testing out a new consumer behavior, as with Airbnb, a new business model, as with Spotify, or where your first market would be a massive competitive advantage to your business, as with LinkedIn. In many other cases, specifically when entering a crowded, established space with already established consumer habits, the bar of expectations your initial product needs to meet is high. For instance, if you are building a new fitness app or a competitor to a startup that had more firepower, a more established team, and a famous founder, as was the case with Reddit, take your time building the right product with the right experience for customers, one that can outshine your competition. Sometimes the right thing to make is an MVP you're proud of, not embarrassed. I don't completely agree with that. I think it's all about marketing. Get it out. If it sucks at the beginning, you're going to learn, you're going to make it better, and then you're going to do marketing. You're going to get the people back. It's going to be a grind, but at least you will be getting them back with informed user information about what these people actually want. So many times, just like the founders of Reddit did at first, founders want to get things perfect before launching. And then they take way too long to launch, and they should have actually launched sooner so that they had information from users and customers about what to actually make. So that aside was from the author of this article. I don't completely agree with it, but I do like the synopsis of how Reddit got its users, its early users, and it faked its critical mass. And we're not there yet, but it's coming. But I would say if you're considering launching something, launch it fast, learn, keep doing marketing. Don't stop doing marketing. You will get the people you lost back. That is how it works. The disappointing road to 2,000 users. That's the next section. And now we get to fake it till you make it. You know what's worse than a launch you, the founders, did not know about? Answer: what comes next? With no plan in mind on how to acquire users, a barely functioning website that requires powerful network effects, and a competitor breathing down your neck, the next few months were rough, to say the least. The best mechanic the founders could come up with to brute force Reddit to the critical mass was to create fake users. Lots and lots of fake users. Every day, the founders of Reddit would use the admin view they created on the website, allowing them to quickly attach a new fake user to any post they create. They posted dozens and dozens of new links every day to make the website seem more legitimate than it was. On a superficial level, the hundreds of fake users lent Reddit credibility that they needed. It social-proofed Reddit. It showed to people that Reddit actually had users and there were people here. And if you posted something, people were going to listen. People were going to see it. Or at least that's what the new human users thought. And on a deeper level, these fake users did two critical things. Number one, they set the tone for the website. In many instances of building a company, looking for the unintended use cases of your product can be a powerful signal for future features and product development. But on a pseudonymous community-first website, you can see how that can be problematic. Having the founder DNA firmly embedded throughout the early history of posts set the culture, the unhidden rules, and the expectation of what Reddit is very clearly and powerfully about. So the founders of Reddit showed new users how they ought to use Reddit by having so many fake users behave the way that they would want users to behave. And this was a lot more effective than telling new users how to behave through FAQs, guidelines, tutorials. And then number two, like we touched upon before, the fake users made people feel like they were part of something real. With hundreds of fake users each having a distinct digital presence, user number 3 would feel they were part of something so much bigger than they were. No one wants to be a part of a ghost town, but many, I would suspect, would love to be part of a vibrant, emerging community on the internet. And we finish with a deep dive about establishing trust. One important aspect here that we barely touched upon is trust. Trust is a critical ingredient in the success of a company, big or small. But the way that we think of trust is frequently flawed. When we think of trust, we often think about how can we establish trust. Clinical psychologist Doris Brothers succinctly put it, trust rarely occupies the foreground of conscious awareness. We are no more likely to ask ourselves how trusting we are at any given moment than to inquire if gravity is still keeping the planets in orbit. Rebuilding trust is a more appropriate phenomenon for what we see many emerging companies do. Users come in with a default trusting instinct. In many ways, those companies quickly erode that trust with things like slow loading time, aggressive marketing copy, opaque pricing, and asking for private information such as emails, phone numbers, social security numbers, and then attempting to rebuild this eroded trust via social proof, case studies, etc. So users come in trusting, and then companies do things that erode that trust. What Reddit did in the early days was to work exceptionally diligently to not lose that initial user trust. They did that by doing two things. And the next part, I'm sure some people are gonna have some thoughts about this, but this is what Reddit did in its early days really well to not erode trust. They had many problems, but people trusted them and came back. And so this is what Reddit did. They had no censorship. Reddit was an actual public square where no arbiter of truth can control what can or cannot be posted on the website. And the author of this says, obviously, they had to walk back on that in the years to come, and the user moderation became a heavy part of how the company operates. But at the beginning, they had no censorship, and they didn't collect any identifiable information on new users. No emails, no phone numbers, no IP addresses. If you opted in to create a Reddit account, then all you needed was a username and a password. That's it. That's cool. That's super cool. This small yet meaningful effort in not losing that initial trust, combined with meeting customer expectations of being a homepage of the internet through these fake, highly curated posts, gave Reddit an earnest shot of building something truly spectacular. And so that is how Reddit faked critical mass, got started. And, the rest of the story, now Reddit is a $10 billion company, super influential tech platform, third most trafficked site from Google, and a great case study for startups. That is all for episode 422 of The Edward Show. Let me know what you think of this one. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you on the next one. Bye now.